Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from chapter 298. Chapter 298. It was a warm, rainy autumn day. The sky and the horizon were both the color of muddy water. At times, a sort of mist descended, and then suddenly heavy slanting rain came down. Denisov, in a felt cloak and a sheepskin cap from which the rain ran down, was riding a thin thoroughbred horse with sunken sides. Like his horse, which turned its head and laid its ears back, he shrank from the driving rain and gazed anxiously before him. His thin face, with its short, thick black beard, looked angry. Beside Denisov rode a captain of the Cossacks, also in felt cloak and a sheepskin cap, and riding a large, sleek Don horse. You saw Luvaisky III was a tall man, as straight as an arrow, pale-faced, fair-haired, with narrow, light eyes, and with calm self-satisfaction in his face and bearing. Though it was impossible to say in what the peculiarity of the horse and rider lay, yet at first glance at the esaul and Denisov, one saw that the latter was wet and uncomfortable, and was a man mounted on a horse. While looking at the esaul, one saw that he was as comfortable and as much at ease as always, and that he was not a man who had mounted a horse, but a man who was one with his horse, a being consequently possessed of twofold strength. A little ahead of them walked a peasant guide, wet to the skin and wearing a gray peasant coat and a white knitted cap. A little behind, on a poor, small, lean Kirghiz mount, with an enormous tail and mane and a bleeding mouth, rode a young officer in a blue French overcoat. Beside him rode a hussar, with a boy in a tattered French uniform and blue cap behind him on the crupper of his horse. The boy held on to the hussar with cold red hands, and raising his eyebrows gazed about him with surprise. This was the French drummer boy captured that morning. Behind them, along the narrow, sodden, cut-up forest road came hussars in threes and fours, and then Cossacks, some in felt coats, some in French greatcoats, and some with horse clothes over their heads. The horses, being drenched by the rain, all looked black, whether chestnut or bay. Their necks, with their wet, close-clinging manes, looked strangely thin. Steam rose from them. Clothes, saddles, reins, all were wet, slippery, and sodden, like the ground and the fallen leaves that strewed the road. The men sat huddled up, trying not to stir, so as to warm the water that had trickled to their bodies and not admit the fresh cold water that was leaking in under their seats, their knees, and at the backs of their necks. In the midst of the outspread line of Cossacks, two wagons, drawn by French horses and saddled by Cossack horses that had been hitched on the front, rumbled over the three stumps and branches and splashed through the water that lay in the ruts. Denisov's horse swerved aside to avoid a pool in the track and bumped his rider's knee against a tree. "Ah, the devil!" exclaimed Denisov angrily. And showing his teeth, he struck his horse 3 times with his whip, splashing himself and his comrades with mud. Denisov was out of sorts, both because of the rain and also from hunger. None of them had eaten anything since morning, and yet more because he still had no news from Dolokhov, and the man sent to capture a tongue had not returned. There'll hardly be another such chance to fall on a transport as today. It's too risky to attack them by oneself, and if we put it off to another day, one of the guerrilla detachments will snatch the prey from under our noses, thought Denisov, continually peering forward, hoping to see a messenger from Dolokhov. On coming to a path in the forest along which he could see far to the right, Denisov stopped. "There's someone coming," said he. The esaul looked in the direction Denisov indicated. "There are two, an officer and a Cossack, but it's not presupposable that it is the lieutenant or the colonel himself," said the esaul, who was fond of using words the Cossacks did not know. The approaching riders, having descended a decline, were no longer visible, but they reappeared a few minutes later. In front, at a wary gallop and using his leather whip, rode an officer, disheveled and drenched, whose trousers had been worked up to above his knees. Behind him, standing in the stirrups, trotted a Cossack. The officer, a very young lad with a broad, rosy face and keen, merry eyes, galloped up to Denisov and handed him a sodden envelope. "From the general," said the officer. "Please excuse its not being quite dry." Denisov, frowning, took the envelope and opened it. "There, they keep telling us it's dangerous, said the officer, addressing the esaul while Denisov was reading the dispatch. "But Komarov and I," he pointed to the Cossack, "we were prepared. We have each of us 2 pistols. But what's this?" he asked, noticing the French drummer boy. "A prisoner. You've already been in action. May I speak to him?" "Wostov, Petya!" exclaimed Denisov, having run through the dispatch. "Why didn't you say who you were?" And turning with a smile, he held out his hand to the lad. The officer was Petya Rostov. All the way, Petya had been preparing himself to behave with Denisov as befitted a grown-up man and an officer, without hinting at their previous acquaintance. But as soon as Denisov smiled at him, Petya brightened up, blushed with pleasure, forgot the official manner he had been rehearsing, and began telling him how he had already been in a battle near Vyazma, and how a certain hussar had distinguished himself there. "Well, I am glad to see you," Denisov interrupted him, and his face again assumed its anxious expression. "Michael Fekolovitch," said he to the esaul, "this is again from the German, you know. He indicated Petya, is serving under him." And Denisov told the esaul that the dispatch just delivered was a repetition of the German general's demand that he should join forces with him for an attack on the transport. "If we don't take it tomorrow, he'll snatch it from under our noses," Denisov added. While Denisov was talking to the esaul, Petya, abashed by Denisov's cold tone, and supposing that it was due to the condition of his trousers, furtively tried to pull them down under his greatcoat so that no one should notice it, while maintaining as martial an air as possible. "Will there be any orders, your honor?" he asked Denisov, holding his hand at the salute and resuming the game of adjutant in general for which he had prepared himself. "Or shall I remain with your honor?" "Orders?" Denisov repeated thoughtfully. "But can you stay till tomorrow?" "Oh, please, may I stay with you?" cried Petya. "But just what did the general tell you? Till we turn at once?" asked Denisov. Petya blushed. "He gave me no instructions. I think I could," he returned inquiringly. "Well, all right," said Denisov. And turning to his men, he directed a party to go on to the halting place arranged near the watchman's hut in the forest, and told an officer on the Kirghiz horse, who performed the duties of an adjutant, to go and find where Dólokhov was and whether he would come that evening. Denisov himself intended going with the esaul and Petya to the edge of the forest, where it reached out to the Shamshevo, to have a look at the part of the French bivouac they were to attack the next day. "Well, old fellow," said he to the peasant guide, "lead us to Shamshevo." Denisov, Petya, and the esaul, accompanied by some Cossacks and the hussar who had had the prisoner, rode to the left across a ravine to the edge of the forest. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 298 of War and Peace. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 298. The Implacable Governor. Anger governs all Denisov does today. This implacable governor furnishes him with a face as surly as the muddy sky above, orders him to lash his horse in unwarrantable frustration, and even denies him the pleasure of enjoying the refreshment of reunion with an old friend, one of the few reliable wellsprings of good cheer that we have. The tragedy is that Denisov freely elects anger to exercise its unsocial power over him. Anger campaigns on thoughtless reaction to negative impressions. In Denisov's case, anger stumps on a few key issues. His horses swerve to avoid a puddle, causing him to bump his knee in a tree. The rain, the hunger, Dólokhov's failure to return with a captive officer in the nearby French transport. Denisov yields to the impression that all of this is bad. Note, however, that each impression is born of an event outside the sphere of Denisov's control. The horse obeys its own counsel. The weather follows its own laws. The demands of warfare preclude eating that morning. He doesn't even know where Dólokhov is right now, much less what that man is doing. Denisov is plucking after fugitive fruit if he desires any outcome other than what nature provides in these instances. The human mind is a parliament with a fusion of powers. We can choose to populate it with the virtues of acceptance and endurance, those great friends of freedom, or, like Denisov today, we can slavishly cede it to the cruel tyranny of anger. Vote wisely. Daily meditation. Whatever the external thing may be, the value which we set upon it places us in subservience to others. Epictetus, The Discourses. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflecting on chapter 298 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. Links to all that are down below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 299 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.